Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. That I want to start with a question. Do you think that someone who washes their hands a lot, or who is, checking to make sure that the coffee pot is off before they leave the house, that is obsessive compulsive disorder? I had someone write into me, and so I committed to doing a whole episode on this. Basically, they were talking about their partner being, a neat freak, but they kept referring to them as having OCD. And I was like, hold up. Not everyone who likes things orderly has obsessive compulsive disorder. So in this episode, I'm going to be breaking down the differences between those two things, because obsessive compulsive disorder is a real disorder that causes a lot of emotional pain for folks who suffer from it. It is a real thing that is difficult to deal with, and it's way more than washing your hands obsessively. If that were the case after the pandemic, we would all have obsessive compulsive disorder if that was the only criteria for having OCD. So before we get into it, if you are new to my channel, well, hello and welcome. Before we get started, please subscribe, hit the bell, because I release new things every Tuesday and Thursday. And hey, I don't want you to miss a thing. So just hit that bell icon so that you can become a part of my crew. If you don't know me, my name is Terri Cole. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, a relationship expert, and the author of Boundary Boss, which you can get at boundarybossbook.com. And I want to say thank you for all of your participation, your questions, your comments. I love them all. I read them all, and I love to highlight them. So I want to say thank you to Dee Campbell on the episode How to Manage and Honor Your Anger. Dee says, I look forward to starting my day with Terry's Tuesday's topic and Thursday's interviews. Always illuminating and thought-provoking. Terry is my absolute mainstay in psychology and inner growth. Why, thank you so much, Dee. I super duper appreciate you being a part of my crew. All right, let's move it on into today's content. So what we're talking about today is, how do you make the distinction between someone sort of being quote-unquote a neat freak, let's say, and someone actually having a serious disorder like obsessive compulsive disorder? We hear, like in the popular, lexicon, I guess we'd call it, out there in the world and on the interwebs, people using the term OCD to describe themselves, to describe other people, but it's really saying that if someone is really neat, they'll say, oh, they totally have OCD. I'm not sure about that, right? The whole Marie Kondo, getting everyone to get into being more neat, this trend sort of brought OCD to the forefront, and people started talking about it more, but the popular use of this term is not actually accurate. So in this episode, we're going to talk about what it is, the way that it can present, and the real struggles that people with OCD can face. So I'm going to put all of this, and I'm going to give you a little questionnaire that you can take in the guide, terricole.com/guide, to see if what you experience, if this resonates with you or someone that you know, is it just being particular about the way that you like things, or is it something more, right? So what is OCD? Lots and lots of people. Statistics say that 1 in every 40 adults and 1 in 100 children live with and suffer from OCD. And this can be a really serious mental health condition, extremely painful. It's about having obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors that interrupt their lives. So it's not just, we all have intrusive thoughts once in a while if we're in a fight with someone or we need to have a hard conversation. That ruminating about things that are impending is one thing, because in one way, there's a logical reason for the rumination. With something like obsessive compulsive disorder, it can just be random. And here's the thing. You can know that the thoughts are illogical, but you don't know how to stop the obsession if you are suffering from actual diagnosable obsessive compulsive disorder. So in order to qualify to actually have the disorder, the person needs to be consumed at least 1 hour a day by obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors. But I would say from my therapeutic experience with clients that it's way more time than that people spend. And, because of this misrepresentation of OCD in the press and everywhere, people always think that all people with obsessive compulsive disorder are extremely and particularly clean. That's not necessarily true, right? You can be just a regular person when it comes to cleanliness and have obsessive compulsive disorder thoughts, intrusive thoughts about many other things that have nothing to do with cleanliness. So understand that this disorder presents itself with many different masks on, and it goes so far beyond the common misconceptions of hand washing or checking the lights or checking that the iron's off or the coffee maker is off. Now, those are valid compulsions that people do experience, but it's more than that, right? It's so much more than that. And it's so painful being trapped in this cycle, this type of a thought disorder, because there's this lack of control if you have constant compulsions. I had a client when I was in New York many years ago who, we all lived in New York City at that point, and every time he saw, this was one of his compulsions, every time he saw a yellow cab, he had to go back to his apartment. Now, that may sound kind of funny because, you're in New York with a million yellow cabs, but it was debilitating. And what happens is he was particularly driven by fear that if he didn't do what the compulsion was driving him to do, which is go back to his apartment, that something terrible would happen. It's like a certain specific kind of almost like superstition, but that has all of this power over you. And there's a zillion different versions of OCD. Every person really is different, but they fall into these 5 general categories, right? Checking, as we said, checking the locks, checking that things are off, fear of contamination or mental contamination, like if a drop from, let's say in New York, you have air conditioning and the water will drop on you. I had a client who believed, like truly in his heart of hearts, had a fear that when that fell on him, he was going to be contaminated with hallucinogenic drugs. So he would run home and take a hot shower and do everything he could to try to avoid this illusion that he thought was happening. And it was so painful and, again, so disruptive for his life. And from a therapeutic point of view, it doesn't help to say, logically, that's not accurate. That is not helpful, because it's really about how do you contend with the rumination and the compulsive thought about it and the real fear that gets incentivized or activated by these particular thoughts. The third category is needing things to be orderly or having things be symmetrical. The fourth is rumination and intrusive thoughts. And the fifth category is sort of up for debate. It used to never be included in this, and now it's starting to be, which is hoarding. So I'm not going to get into that here. Obviously, hoarding is an obsessive compulsive something, right? If you're hoarding, you are doing it compulsively. You cannot get rid of things. But some aspects of hoarding are not actually considered to be OCD. It's looked at as a separate condition altogether. So we're going to leave that off the table for right now. But thinking about the most obvious ones and the things that I've seen the most in my practice in 25 years is the need to compulsively check that, plugs are plugged in. It's like fear of damage, fear of leaks, fear of harm, compulsively, obsessively worrying about things. And this could be like needing reassurance from others in your life, right? About the OCD fears. Like, are you asking your partner, are you sure? Did you see me turn the thing off? Did you see me lock the door? That type of a thing. There's also this whole way that obsessive compulsive disorder can present as past memories, where it's checking your own memory to make sure that you are recalling events in the appropriate way. It's like obsessively rethinking a conversation to be like, am I sure I didn't cause harm to that person in that conversation? Was what I said offensive? And the more you think about it, the more doubt sets in this OCD cycle of just worsening how you're feeling about yourself. Oh my God, it's so exhausting. Like, I'm tired. Literally, I'm actually tired just talking about it, because I have had more than a few clients who have suffered from diagnosable OCD, and it's just exhausting. Locking doors and windows. And when you answer the questions in the guide, you'll see, but keep in mind, we all have our things, right? The real question about OCD, because I can tell you right now, I live in the middle of nowhere, and no matter how hot it is, I shut and lock every window on the first floor of my house. Now, I grew up in a very safe place. We didn't lock our doors at night where I grew up, but I did live in New York City for 30 years, so that could be part of it. But even when it's hot, and I live in the middle of the country, so we don't have air conditioning here, and in my house would probably be cooler. I mean, I'll leave the upstairs windows open, but now, is that me being paranoid? I don't know. I mean, I live in a no crime area pretty much, but it's what I need to do to feel safe. Now, how I know that doesn't, for me, fall into the category of OCD is that it does not cause me distress. It's just what I do every night before I go to bed. And I have a lot of ritualistic things that I do, and I'm sure all of you do, right? This is like being a human on planet Earth, like how we get through things. So if you have a particular way you want to do this, we hear this with athletes. They'll have a certain medal, like a St. Christopher's medal or some kind of medal that they feel like they need to have on while they're playing, or they need to do things in a certain order. This is actually very common in sports. But again, there's a fine line, because the question is, how debilitated would that athlete be if he lost his St. Christopher medal, right? And if the answer is he would be bummed out, but not, or she, but they wouldn't be debilitated. Because it's really all about how much pain and suffering does those thought patterns cause for you, right? How do you must do something in a certain way. Is it intrusive in your life? Does it take up too much space in your life? Because, back to other ways that it presents, doors locked or windows locked, right? Checking the handle multiple times. None of that stuff is part of my nighttime ritual. I just shut the window and lock it. That's it. I move on. I have faith that I locked it. So again, we're always looking at the amount of pain and suffering the thoughts are creating for you. There can be checking of the knobs on the stove. There can be checking the water taps. There's stuff with your car. It could be like every time you park it, you keep physically checking that it's secure. Again, electrical appliances, hair curlers, hair straighteners. You might physically check that device many times. But here's the thing. Checking it once could be normal, because you want, especially I live in a house from 1807, so really fires would be very bad. Checking it once, being careful. There's nothing wrong with that. But if I leave the house and have almost all the time have a thought like, oh my God, I think I left it on, even though I've never left it on, then that is where we're getting into it really being a problem. House lights, candles, having to drive a particular way, and literally not being able to change from that way. And let's just say that there's a detour. How if you would become very stressed out because you can't go the way that you normally go, being worried about illnesses, being worried about having something wrong with you, rereading texts a million times and rereading them before you send them or rereading them after you send them to make sure that you did it right or that you didn't say anything wrong. There's so many things that there's so many different ways, and I will share a more comprehensive list in the guide for you. So terricole.com/guide. The contamination thing is just fear of being dirty, and contamination can be this obsessive worry, right? We're afraid that we're contaminated or going to get sick, or someone that we love is getting sick or is contaminated with something. Total fear. Like OCD can also come out as fear of public toilet, fear of having chemicals getting on you. Like I was saying about my client, where the air conditioner water falling on you, and he was convinced and so fearful So that's fear of contamination. But his was very specific, that it was going to be a hallucinogenic experience. Not touching door handles, not public telephones, if there are any of those anymore, they're probably not. Fear of hospitals, eating in public places, not touching staircase banisters, fear of being contaminated during sex, like germs from the other person, even though you kind of want to have sex. But sometimes people with OCD, it really gets in the way, or creates hours and hours of labor afterwards of cleaning the body like a ridiculous amount of times, and cleaning the sheets and like so much. And I won't say ridiculous, I'll say excessive. How's that? Because ridiculous is judgmental. Fear of crowds, not wanting to touch money, teeth brushing. There's so many things. So this is not just about your washing hands, right? This is not just about coming back to your house 7 times because you thought you left something on. It is so much deeper than that. So if this is something that you feel like you've been suffering from in your life, first of all, you're not alone. And it is a legitimate disorder, right? Like, we all have our things. So if this is causing you stress, there are things that you can do to lessen the experiences, and moving away from these compulsions, the cleaning, the washing, the repeating acts. That's another one, is repeating things, and having all of these mental rituals, which is mentally exhausting to do so. And I'll give you some ideas in the guide as well of things that you can do to make obsessive compulsive disorder if you're suffering from it. There are different modalities that are incredibly helpful, and of course involving a licensed therapist who specializes in obsessive compulsive disorders is really going to be your most helpful and effective experience in releasing yourself from this type of prison. Because here's the thing, everything we do, you guys, there's a reason, meaning it's driven by something. There is some gain from doing it. It is controlling or binding a certain level of anxiety, because by actually doing the rituals, the anxiety is released. Of course, the problem is it's a never-ending cycle. So again, so much of the time, the way that our brains work, even when it is a dysfunctional cycle, there are reasons why it's happening. So I hope that this was helpful to you. I hope that it illuminated to you the difference between someone being orderly or very neat or very clean, and someone suffering from a legitimate mental health challenge of obsessive compulsive disorder. If this was helpful to you, please share it in your world. I hope you guys have an amazing week. Make sure you get the guide, terricole.com/guide. And as always, take care of you.